Marcus had always been a skeptic when it came to love at first sight, but Sloane was different. They had matched on a high-end dating app a week before Valentine's Day. She claimed to be a traveling cellist, elegant and soft-spoken. Their entire courtship had been through text messages that arrived at odd hours of the night, filled with strange, poetic descriptions of the city. For their first date on Valentine's night, Marcus invited her to his penthouse. He had prepared a lavish dinner, but when Sloane arrived, she refused to eat. She sat at the table, her hands folded perfectly, wearing a vintage silk dress that smelled faintly of mothballs and damp earth. She spent the entire night staring not at Marcus, but at his reflection in the large floor-to-ceiling windows behind him. "You look so much more peaceful in the glass," she whispered, her voice a low melodic hum. As the night wore on, Marcus began to feel a strange lethargy, his head spinning. After only half a glass of wine, he excused himself to the kitchen to get water. When he looked back into the dining room, Sloane was gone. He walked toward the hallway, his socks padding silently on the hardwood, when he heard a rhythmic tink, tink, tink. He followed the sound to his guest bedroom. The door was ajar. Inside, Sloane was standing in front of a full-length vanity. She had a small silver hammer in her hand and was methodically tapping the glass of the mirror. With every tap, she whispered a names Marcus didn't recognize. "What are you doing?" Marcus croaked, his vision blurring. Sloane didn't turn around. Instead, she looked at him through the mirror. Her reflection began to move independently of her body, its jaw dropping open in a silent, jagged scream, while the physical Sloane remained perfectly still, smiling. "The glass is so thin tonight, Marcus," she said. She turned around with a sudden, jerky motion, her limbs moving like a marionette's. She didn't attack. She simply walked toward him and placed a cold, damp hand over his eyes. Marcus blacked out. When he woke up the next morning, the sun was blinding. Sloane was gone. There was no sign of a struggle, but when he went to the bathroom to splash water on his face, he recoiled. Every mirror in his house, from the vanity to the small hand mirror in the drawer, had been shattered. No, but it wasn't just broken. The shards hadn't fallen to the floor. They were gone. Every piece of reflective glass had been meticulously removed from the frames, leaving behind nothing but empty, dark wood. When he checked his phone, the dating app was gone, and his call history was a string of zeros. To this day, Marcus refuses to look at his own reflection, terrified that he might finally see what Sloane took with her. Leo had been seeing Maya for 3 months when the air between them began to sour with fear. Maya was vibrant, but she carried a shadow named Caleb. Caleb wasn't just an ex-boyfriend. He was a parasite from her college days who had never accepted the word no. By early February, the digital harassment had turned physical. Caleb began leaving offerings on her porch, dead pressed flowers and boxes of chocolates that smelled faintly of copper. On Valentine's night, Leo took Maya to a secluded bistro by the pier, hoping the salt air would clear their heads. But as they sat by the window, Maya froze. Outside, sitting on a rusted iron bench, was a man in a heavy charcoal coat. His hat was pulled so low his features were a void, but his head was tilted at a sharp, unnatural angle, tracking their every movement through the glass. They didn't finish their meal. Back at Leo's isolated rental house, the silence was absolute until the backyard erupted. A heavy, wet thud echoed against the siding. Leo stepped onto the patio, the moonlight casting long skeletal shadows. He found a stack of heavy wooden chairs tossed aside like toothpicks. Then he saw it, a pair of wide, unblinking eyes peering through the dense briars at the edge of the woods. Caleb didn't run when he was spotted. He stepped out of the thorns, his hands shredded and bleeding from the bushes, and lunged with a guttural hiss. Leo pinned him to the frozen dirt, feeling the man's heart racing with a terrifying rhythmic intensity. When the police dragged Caleb away, they found a map of Leo's house in his pocket, with red circles around every window. The encounter began in the flickering neon light of a steakhouse parking lot. Elias and Sarah were approached by a couple who looked like they had been plucked from a 1950s funeral, Mr. and Mrs. Vane. Mrs. Vane's smile was wide and static, showing too much gum. "You have such exquisite bone structure," she whispered to Sarah, her voice like dry parchment. "We are preservationists. Come to our studio. It's only a 5-minute drive into the pines." Sensing a predatory edge in the woman's gaze, Elias declined and drove Sarah to a nearby neon-lit mini golf course. They thought they were safe until the chime at the entrance rang. The Vanes were there, standing by the windmill, motionless. "A game for the ages," Mr. Vane rasped, speaking for the first time. The Vanes versus the Millers. Elias felt a cold sweat break. He had never told these strangers his last name. They fled to the car, speeding down a lightless corridor of ancient oaks. Suddenly, a series of sharp pops rang out. Both front tires were shredded by a sting strip laid across the asphalt. Elias didn't hesitate. He killed the lights, grabbed Sarah, and dragged her deep into the rotting leaves of the forest. Minutes later, a black sedan crept up to their disabled car. Mrs. Vane stepped out into the moonlight, her face twisted into a mask of feral hatred. "They're still warm," she shrieked into the trees. "Find them before the light fades." The couple waited in the dirt for hours, listening to the crunch of footsteps circling their hiding spot, until the distant blue flash of police lights forced the collectors back into the dark. After a brutal breakup, Julian sought solace in the digital void of dating apps. He met Vesper, a girl who seemed to be his perfect mirror. She liked the same obscure films, studied the same complex architecture, and hated the noise of the city. Their Valentine's date was an effortless dream of shared secrets and quiet laughter. When a snowstorm rolled in, Julian invited her to stay the night in his apartment. At 3 a.m., the sound of the bathroom door creaking shut pulled Julian from a shallow sleep. He waited for the sound of the faucet, but there was only a rhythmic, wet scratching noise. He drifted off only to bolt upright at 5 a.m. The room was freezing. The window had been cracked open, letting in a dusting of gray snow. Vesper was gone from the bed. Julian found her in the corner of the room, her back to him, her forehead pressed firmly against the corner where two walls met. "Vesper," he whispered, his heart hammering against his ribs. When he touched her shoulder, she didn't just turn, she whipped around with a mechanical, bone-cracking speed. Her eyes were wide, the pupils blown out until they were entirely black, and she let out a piercing, high-pitched keening sound. She clawed at his face with jagged fingernails before leaping over the bed and sprinting out the front door into the blizzard. When Julian entered the bathroom, he gagged. The room was a slaughterhouse of his own belongings. His clothes were shredded into ribbons, and the vanity mirror was covered in a thick, dark substance smeared into the shape of a human face, his face. The police later told him that the Vesper he met didn't exist. The photos on her profile belonged to a woman who had been missing for over a decade.